David with Fantasy Draft Assistant, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use the Draft Tracker. So in a previous video I showed how to set up the Draft Tracker, which is clicking this button and using this screen. So please refer to that video if you need more information. But in this video I'll go ahead and just click Launch Draft Tracker. And this will start us in dock mode, and there'll be another video on how to use dock mode and how to use floating mode, so please refer to that one. But for the purpose of this video I'll just stay in the dock mode. So once you're in the Draft Tracker, all the screens are kind of the same. There's different screens or windows that each serve a different purpose. So by default here in the upper left we see the status screen, which if I pull that out separately, it has basically the status of your draft. So what pick you're on, what round you're on, what pick in that round, and the last pick. So as we go through a draft, you'll see that will increment and show you where you are in the draft. So that's kind of it's the stoplight icon. It's showing you how the draft is progressing. The next screen we'll talk about here is the available player screen, which will be generally your screen you draft from. I'll pull that out here, and you can see it will have whether you targeted a player or not. If this is kind of darkened, so if I target Jamaal Charles, just by double clicking this option here, it will go to red. So now you can clearly see I want to target Jamaal Charles. It'll show your rating and icons here for their status, and if I mouse over it you can see it has Jamaal Charles as an injury risk. And then if you have notes on a player, this is obviously from last season when he was injured in the preseason, but I can see the notes, and it's in a fairly small screen. But in this screen I have all players, or I can look at just particular positions. I can also, as of version 5, I can drag a certain section of positions to be bigger or smaller. Like your quarterbacks and your running backs, you might want to see more, but your tight ends, your kickers, you may want to see less. So I can, for example, just see the top couple of kickers, see more by quarterback. This screen for older users of Fantasy Draft Assistant, you can also right click and switch to tabbed mode, which will go back to being how it used to be, whereas all of your players are just in separate tabs instead of grouped. You can always right click and say switch to group mode, and you go back exactly how you had it. The next screen is the search screen, which by default is here on the top right, and that, as the name implies, is where you can search for players. So it gives you options to type in part of a first name. You can see there's Tom Brady, or you can search by, you can click clear, or search by particular position, teams, etc. And you can use this to draft. So if I want to see Tom Brady, I can simply double click and Tom Brady's drafted. The other thing this screen is important for is if someone drafts a player that isn't on your list, you can simply put them in their information and then select the player's unranked or double click, and that player will be drafted, and so that doesn't interrupt your draft and you can proceed even though he wasn't on the list. The next screen is the Your Pick screen, which is by default here, and this will show you what players are on your team. So as you can see, I just drafted this unknown player. By default it starts with all the starters with a blank position, and will fill those positions in, and if you pick a backup it will fill them in, and they will be not bolded here. They will be a little less pronounced, so that you can quickly see what players you've already drafted and compare their bye weeks, things like that. The next screen is the all players drafted screen, which is where you'll see a running list of here are the rounds and the players and which teams drafted them. That's pretty straightforward. Then there is the statistics screen, which by default will be a separate tab here at the bottom. This will show you which teams have drafted which positions. You can also mouse over to see specifically which players they drafted. And once a particular team has drafted all of their starters at a position, it will turn a highlighted green and bolded so that you can clearly see which teams have filled their starters, and that can give you an idea, especially at the top or bottom of a round, which teams before or after you might select which players, and give you an idea if you're the last team to pick a tight end, you can wait an extra round or two. The last of the built-in screens is the draft chart screen. So we'll see here on the tab on the bottom. This will show a chart of the players and the teams and the rounds. So you've probably seen this if you've ever looked at Fantasy Draft Magazine, something like that, where it'll show going across. Here are the players as they're selected and what team they're going to. New in version 5, you also notice an arrow that'll tell you which team is picking or what's the direction of the draft. But that'll allow you a different way to keep up with the draft. The one screen I have skipped over here is the toolbar screen, which will have buttons pretty much in the order I covered them for showing or hiding those screens that I talked about. So they're here on the left side by default. You can always change that. New for version 5 is a custom view form, which is the red toolbox here. I'll go over that in more detail in another video. The next button here on the toolbar is for switching to floating draft mode or switching back to dock draft mode. I'll also cover that in another video. And then you'll see screens for buttons for showing or hiding all forms. That's especially if you're using float mode, those are useful. And then there's an undo button. So if you accidentally selected Marshawn Lynch, you can click undo and that will reverse that pick. There's also a button for the beta auto tracker, which I'll cover in another video. There's a button for saving this draft, which will allow you to save it for continuing later or viewing later, or saving to pick up with the same options in another draft. And finally, you can click print in order to print your draft. I'll just show you what that looks like so far. And you can see it's kind of like the draft chart mode, where it shows each team and each round and what players are selected, so you can print out the draft if you want to keep that to refer to. So those are the basic options, and probably as you picked up as I went along, the whole idea here is to follow along with your draft by just clicking on players as they're drafted. The draft tracker will keep up with the draft and show you the information here in any way you choose. And then finally, when you're done with the draft, you can click the exit button here or close the dock mode, and it will by default ask you if you want to view a comparison, which I covered in another video that will show you how the draft compared to how you had players ranked. Thanks for watching this video. For more information on Fantasy Draft Assistant, please view my other videos. Thanks.